Welcome back to the second part of Lesson 5, Activating My Democracy, Real People to the Rescue. We will now begin with our analysis of 3 bills to address a constitutional amendment. This is a small group activity. Every group has the set of the 3 bills and this analysis guide that's shown on the screen. So it's a bill summary, which in this case, these resolutions are all very short. So we have House Joint Resolution 48 and Senate Joint Resolution, that's the SJR 20. The reason there's a little star there is because that was introduced in the last session, the 2015 session. It has not yet been reintroduced as the other 2 have. HJR 48 and HJR 2. Still, this is good for comparative purposes. So the first thing to do in your small groups is to read the bill. These are about 3 or 4 paragraphs. We will be doing this together. Circle any weasel words that you see. We're going to be starting with HJR 48, and what you'll see on your activity sheet is that there are 3 statements on artificial persons and 3 statements on campaign financing reform. And we want our bill to do both now. So you're going to read the statements and decide, does the bill do this, yes, or not do this? In which case you'd mark a no in this column. And then when you're done at your table in a small group, just kind of discuss so that we can have a discussion about these bills. So HJR 48, these are the statements, the first 3 statements on artificial persons. They are the same statements on every single bill. Does this bill establish that only natural persons have inalienable rights? Does it confirm that artificial persons have no rights under the Constitution? Does it confirm that artificial persons are regulated by the people? Let's have a look. There's a couple of paragraphs in this first bill. The first one is, quote, it proposes a constitutional amendment providing that the rights protected by the Constitution are the rights of natural persons only. That's pretty straightforward. No weasel words there. Let's keep going. Okay. The next phrase is artificial persons, such as corporations, established by laws of any state or any foreign state, shall have no rights under this Constitution and are subject to regulation by the people through federal, state, and local law. The reason some of these words are bold is because those are the ones that should grab your attention. They should be flags. This HJR 48 doesn't just talk about corporations. It talks about all artificial persons. That's a good thing, okay? And it uses the word shall. That means must. That's a very strong word. Federal, state, and local laws. Well, democracy should extend all the way down to our local communities. Don't we have local elections? So we want the same laws and some campaign finance reform laws to apply at the local level as well. So far, so good with HJR 48. Let's read on. The privileges of such artificial entities shall be determined by the people through federal, state, or local law and shall not be construed to be inherent or inalienable. Okay, good again. This is good. It's talking about privileges. So the drafters of this understood that artificial entities have privileges. They have charter rights, not constitutional rights. And shall, again, good, requires it. Local law, again, good. We want to be consistent through all of our levels of government. And shall, again, it's a requirement. So it's pretty clear, concise language. And so after discussion, pretty much everybody always says, yes, we get this. This is good, clear. Let's go on with the second half. I'm going to read these again the first time only. The 3 statements that refer to campaign finance reform are, does it establish that money is not speech? Does it require government to regulate and control campaign finance rules? Does it require government to require public disclosure of campaign funds? So here we go, looking at, again, still at HJR 48 now. It does require. Right off the bat, it says requires federal, state, and local governments to regulate, limit, or prohibit contributions and expenditures, including those of a candidate. That's pretty strong language. It's requiring it straight down all from federal to local government, and it's including a candidate, the wealthy individual that now has unlimited power to spend money or to contribute, to give. So this bill actually goes on and is even more specific. Instead of just saying to regulate, it actually lays out precisely how that regulation should be on a broad basis. It should ensure that all citizens, regardless of their economic status, have access to the political process, and that no person gains as a result of another person's money a lot, substantially, more access to or ability to influence in any way the election of any candidate for public office or any ballot measure. Pretty inclusive language. It does require, again, so that's good. We like the descriptor there, very specific. This would be great in our Constitution as the highest law of the land. And the last one is, a statement about it also requires that any permissible contributions and expenditures be publicly disclosed. And the reason I changed some of these words were with the mind that I'm trying to teach sixth graders some of about analyzing these bills. So again, this is all no weasel words, and it all looks pretty good. So again, we have 6 yeses. So this is our bar now that we can compare the other 2 bills to. So moving on with SJR 20, which if it's not introduced, there might be something that looks like it, so let's pay attention. First 3 regarding the artificial person. What does this proposal do? It proposes a constitutional amendment declaring that the rights listed in the Constitution and other rights held, retained by the people are the rights of natural persons. So far, so good. So far, so good. The next phrase is the terms people, person, and citizen as used in the Constitution do not include corporate entities established by the law of any state, the United States, or any foreign state. So, whoa, corporate entities. Well, we know that corporations are artificial people. We know that there's other types of artificial people. Should this get passed into law, I bet what we would see is a bunch of corporations that suddenly morph into another form of artificial person, because this amendment only proposes to regulate corporate entities. Watch how fast they could change form, I bet. Okay, so that's kind of a red flag. That would be, to me, a weasel word. Doesn't say artificial entities. The last part of this one is it prohibits the Constitution from being construed or used to limit such rights enumerated, listed in the Constitution, and other rights retained or held by the people, which are inalienable. Well, that looks good, because we know inalienable rights are retained by the people. But look how this proposed bill defines people. It allows artificial entities other than corporations to be people. So what this bill actually does is it elevates from common law the ability of corporations to hold constitutional rights, and it puts it into constitutional law. It's actually horrible. This gives it affirms the common law, the case law that has come out over 200 years. and it elevates it straight up into constitutional law. It recognizes artificial entities have constitutional rights, the opposite of what it says on paper. So with that, no, not so good with the artificial person business. Now let's look at the campaign finance business. Not going to read these. We're going to go straight to the proposed bill. It proposes a constitutional amendment declaring that corporate entities are subject to such regulation as the people through representatives in Congress and state representatives may determine reasonable, consistent with the powers of Congress and the states. A lot of weasel words in here, okay? Corporate entities, we already know. No, we wanted to read artificial entities. Subject to, that doesn't require anything. You may decide to do it, you may not. We want this to be a requirement in our Constitution. People through their representatives, well, sometimes the people can do ballot measures and ballot initiatives, and we can correct. We have other ways to correct our representatives if they're not truly representing us. So this is a little bit controlling of how the people can actually affect change. May doesn't mean anything. You may not, okay? It's not a requirement, and reasonable is a total subjective word. What is reasonable to one person is totally not reasonable to somebody else. So this really does nothing positive for campaign finance reform in the way of taking away constitutional rights of artificial entities to First Amendment. So no, straight down the line. Moving on to our last House Joint Resolution 2. We're going to do this one together now. This is the sum total of it. This bill proposes a constitutional amendment authorizing Congress and the states to set reasonable limits on the raising and spending of money by candidates and others to influence elections. It also grants Congress and the states the power to implement and enforce the amendment by legislation. They are allowed to distinguish between natural persons and corporations or other artificial entities created by law, including by prohibiting such entities from spending money to influence elections. Whoa, okay, what is this bill really saying? The first part of it, reasonable limits, we already covered reasonable. That is a weasel word, not specific enough for purposes to be in the Constitution. And others, well, who does that open the door to? Persons who are not natural. The second paragraph is the one that really caught my attention. Congress already has the power to implement and enforce legislation. That's granted as part of the Constitution. So the first sentence is like affirming what we already have. But this second part of it about allowed to distinguish between natural and artificial persons, what did that just do? It says, or other artificial entities created by law. It is elevating the common law that has created these artificial persons with constitutional rights and created the economic theory that speech is somehow money. This is not in the Constitution. This HJR 2 puts it in the Constitution. It's in common law right now. That's enough of a problem for we the people. We certainly don't want it elevated to our Constitution. So with this, no, all the way across. So there's a great discussion here. This takes pretty much a class period. But what we'd like to do at the end now is say, okay, it's been 2 years. We have amended the Constitution with our ideal bill. We did it, okay? So what now? What changes? What changes in law? What changes in society? Let's have a look. So the way we do this part of it is it's a full class activity, but each small group has a set of clues, okay? There are 2 clues, and they look something like this. Clue 1, the court grants corporations a protected right under the 14th Amendment to freedom of contract to exploit workers and the poor. What law could that be? Clue 2 is the court grants corporations a protected right under the First Amendment to advertise on citizen initiatives. So the idea is that these small table groups have this set of clues, and they have 2 overrule labels. And they have to figure out from their clues which laws they are going to go post on the timeline their overrule label. And when everybody's done, we come back and we look at the whole timeline of rights, powers, and oppression, and then we have a discussion about what this might mean for our society. So let's have a look now after we've done this activity. How did this activity make you feel? Pretty empowered, eh? I've had students and teachers and people in workshops come back with like, that made me feel great. I feel so empowered. And you should, because we the people have just passed this constitutional amendment, and what that means is we have reset the bar. We have reset the bar for acts of Congress, statutory law, for administrative law, for common law. Everything has to align now with the fact that corporations no longer have equal protection under the law. And that means they no longer are entitled to constitutional rights. And what that will do, like dominoes, when cases are brought to the court can now no longer give corporations our constitutional rights. So what we're back to is charter rights, and that's fine. Under charter rights, we can charter a corporation to have the right to sue and be sued. That's fine, not as a constitutional right. What this will do also is make the corporations more accountable to the people. Yes, they can still make money, but not the gobs of money that they've been making in the past that have totally disempowered our society and the people in it, and with this huge wealth inequality. So the third thing it does is it resets the separation of power line, so that clearly it restores rule to the people, and it's going to hold, once again, attempt to hold these corporate entities and other artificial persons and the government accountable to the people. Here's our little wolf back again to remind us that we really need to watch these things below the power line because they can be very dangerous to our sovereign rule. Well, the law changes. So now what changes in society? Quite a bit. To start this exploration, we actually go back to the rights race. So we already know the room and the setup and the lineup and the corporate person that's in with everybody else. But this time, in Act 2 of the rights race, we now have corporations with their corporate charter again, but this time they have their charter rights as privileges, not as constitutional rights, not as human rights, okay? Big difference this time, as we'll see. As we read the statements, mostly it's the people stepping forward and the corporations stepping backward. No more empowerment by constitutional rights. So after the rights race, the corporation is at the back of the room, and this time the people are front and center, right up there with the governor. And the debriefing reflects the sense of empowerment that the people feel when we actually have influence in our government to shape our society. So this is a very empowering exercise, Act 1 and Act 2. Now, what could change? What would the shape of change look like? Well, once again, our elected officials would actually be not beholden to the money that elects them. We would have actually elected officials that are responsive to the citizens. There's a reference to a Princeton study in this material that analyzed 20 years of data and found that our elected officials are not listening to us at all right now, okay? So this would change, and we would get things that are important to the people, that the people value, that we like. We could remake free and fair elections. We could reform our prison system. We could actually transition to a clean energy source. We could even amend maybe and get the Supreme Court more democratic. These are all things that people want, and our government now should be more responsive to what it is we want. This is the end of Lesson 5.